So like Blondie, you just mentioned, like I know a couple of guys in that band, and Clem Burke, the drummer with Blondie, he is a beast.
It's the Onstage Podcast with Chris Robert. Not every one of your social networks has Ivan FUNKBOY Bodley. I notice that some of them just say FUNKBOY music and all that stuff, but this is just to let the audience know that you are on the net. Can't miss
I
it.
am available. I can be found for sure.
Yes.
Actually, the website address, you can just do funkboy.net. That takes you right to everything too.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
Yeah.
And this Wix site, a lot of people are using that. It's remember the MySpace?
Oh, yeah. Yes, I do. Indeed, I do.
Yeah. Is Wixsite.com a new one type of MySpace type thing?
No, they've been around a while. They're a website hosting company, and the fact that my address reads like it does just means I'm using their free option.
Welcome to the Onstage Podcast. We have a special guest here. This is Ivan FUNKBOY Bodley. I don't know if everyone knows who he is, but he has averaged 228 gigs a year for over a decade and has played approximately 300 shows, maybe more, including Broadway, like Rock of Ages and Hedwig, and he played with 50 inductees to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. There we go. FUNKBOY, Ivan Bodley. Hello. How are you, sir?
That's all true. Thank you for saying so. I think my Broadway count is probably up to closer to 500 now, and counting. Yeah, it keeps going. The tally keeps running, which is good for me because it means I get to keep the lights on for another year.
Yeah, definitely. Why not? I mean, like you play this fascinating, excellent electronic guitar called the bass guitar.
I do,
and
indeed.
I researched that one, and I actually was able to figure that out, and things that you can and cannot do, and some of the special instruments that you can use with it, and
yeah.
So yeah, it's amazing. Okay, so
it's a relatively young instrument too. It was invented by Leo Fender of the Fender Guitar Company in 1951. So it's kind of got a fairly. It's a Fender. In fact, the old timers used to call any electric bass. They used to call them the Fender bass. It was like calling any tissue or Kleenex kind of thing. It just the brand name became so ubiquitous back in the days. So we're looking 70 years old. This instrument is sort of as it's existed on the planet. So it's still relatively young if you think about the history of violins and harpsichords and things like that.
I like the violin, but not every instrument like the violin is the same. Like, I mean, as I was mentioning, just one other rock and roll musician we had on our podcast a couple of weeks ago. You can play the bass guitar, you can play electric guitar, you can play the acoustic guitar, but you can't play the violin. You have to learn that separately, even though it's a string instrument. But I have seen people take the violin, whip it around, and just play it like a banjo. I've seen.
Yeah, sure. The country guys will do that. Yeah, they'll strum it like a guitar or mandolin, obviously. Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Definitely.
So I want to ask you. So you're a 1986 alumnus. You've come a long way since the days you're musical director of Tulane's student-run radio station WTUL.
Yes, sir.
Let's go back to a little bit further to when you were young and you were growing. Why the bass guitar? Why not the drums or the?
I have a theory that your instrument chooses you. You don't choose an instrument; it chooses you, because there's certain instruments that sort of correlate to certain personality types due to their role in the band, like what they do. So the bass is like a supportive instrument. It's not usually a soloist instrument, although it certainly can be used for that. So you kind of have this sort of attitude, like you can't be like looking to be, the hair flipping posing rock star at the front of the stage. That's usually the lead guitar player, right? Or the singer who's going, look at me. The bass player is kind of like grooving along and sort of like gluing the whole thing together. And I remember early on seeing things like Rick James playing live on the Midnight Special on television. I was like, and he was playing bass, and I was like, that sounds like a great instrument. I don't really understand what that is, but I wanted to like somehow it spoke to me. It really resonated with me. So a buddy of mine at high school had a bass. He might have made it himself. I think it only had 2 strings on it. It didn't even have all 4 strings on it. And with just those 2 strings, I could pick out the bass line to this Rick James song that I'd heard on television called You and I. It was this 4-note repeating line. And I picked it out by ear, and I was like, somehow this makes sense to me. It speaks to me. So I think the bass chose me. That's what I think happened.
So whereabouts did you grow up? It says in your biography that you grew up in Chattanooga.
Chattanooga, Tennessee, born and raised, Choo Choo Town. Yes, sir. Reporting for duty, 100%.
So what kind of other music lessons did you have in Chattanooga?
I really just fiddled around with viola for like a minute, like in elementary school, and guitar lessons for like a half a minute in junior high, and piano lessons for about a half minute also in junior high, and then nothing. I didn't really pick up the bass guitar seriously until my senior year in high school. So I came to it kind of late in terms of people thinking about how, you start playing at 3 years old if you're going to become a prodigy. I was really late to the party and didn't pick it up till I was a senior in high school. So then when I graduated in high school, I was in no position to go off to music school. I just had been, taking private lessons, and it was basically a hobby at that point. So I went to college for biomedical engineering and ended up getting a, a psychology degree from Tulane. But as you said a minute ago there, I basically majored in being the music director of my campus radio station. That's what got me into the music business that way.
Well, tell us how it just suddenly started, that you just started this band or started playing with some of these top guys. And then you ended up becoming like playing with like 50 rock and roll singers and musicians, and they're all inducted Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Was that your doing to get them in there?
No, but they're welcome to call me anytime if they need advice for who to get in there. I got plenty of people on the list that aren't quite in yet. No, it's sort of like, as you mentioned, I graduated Tulane in 1986. I'm really getting to be an old man now. So I've got sort of, in retrospect, you look back and you realize, yeah, I've played with 50 inductees into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And that's not my entire resume. My resume is like 7 pages long, just people that I played with once or played with here, multi-act bills or whatever. But in retrospect, those are the kind of statistics you can kind of collect and say, okay, yeah, I've done that. I've done 13 Broadway shows, all these Rock and Roll Hall of Famers. But it started kind of innocently in New Orleans when I was at Tulane. A friend of mine was a booking agent, and she had booked the great Bo Diddley to come play at a nightclub in New Orleans. Wow. And in those days, Bo wasn't always traveling with his own band. He would use a pickup band of local guys. And, I knew the booking agent said, hey, give me a shot, give me an audition, so I auditioned for the music director, the guy who was running the band. And he, for whatever reason, gave me a shot, if it was nepotism or whatever, I'm happy it worked out. But I got to play with Bo Diddley. It was my first sort of major-ish kind of major credit rock star kind of gig, and I did 3 different shows with him on 3 different trips to New Orleans. The same thing with pickup band. Just an absolute joy to play with him. Really interesting guy. All of his songs are basically 1 chord each. He's just kind of chunking along that Bo Diddley beat, chunk, 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 chunk. And he played with an open E tuning on his guitar. So if he had no capo on his guitar, we were in E. If he had a capo on the 3rd fret, we were in G. If he had a capo on the 5th fret, we were in A. That was the end of the rehearsal. That's all you needed to know. And he did a 90-minute show of these 1 chord songs, and it was fascinating. He was a consummate entertainer, showman, architect, one of the originators of rock and roll. And I knew at the time it was an honor to play with him, but sort of even looking back from this vantage point many years later, I'm like, wow, what an amazing opportunity right out of the gate to get to play with somebody like Bo,
Yeah, I'm just totally amazed that I'm able to interview the famous funk boy Ivan Bodley. I did a lot of research on you. I just can't believe it. I saw that picture of you and Neville brothers as well.
Yeah.
Neville. So tell us about him.
Well, again, I went to school in New Orleans, and I was, music director of the campus radio station. So we would help co-promote shows, concerts in town. And there was an annual fundraiser that the radio station did every year, and the Nevilles came and would play our fundraiser. I used to see them about once a month or so. Anytime I could go, had a night off, I would go see them, the Neville Brothers band play. So I've known, I've known them for 40 years. There's a
Wow.
picture of me and Art and Aaron hanging out outside of a gig from 1984. And I just saw Aaron a couple of weeks ago. He lives up in upstate New York. I just happened to be driving by where he lives. So I stopped in and just had a visit for an hour and a half with my old friend, just sitting out in front of the yard, like, two old guys sharing memories
Two old guys.
from the old days. It was fun.
Yeah.
They're great people. I love them at all.
All right. I'm going to mention a couple of musicians. You tell me if you played with them.
Okay.
Aerosmith.
No, not yet, but I'm willing. I'm available if they need.
Rush.
No, none of the guys in Rush have called me yet. But again, my phone's on, at any time.
How about well, I would say Air Supply, but probably no.
Well, that's funny because some friends of mine have been working with them. They're working on a Broadway musical about their catalog and their lives. So
Wow.
I haven't yet played with them, but I have some very close friends who have. And that's one of those kind of things, like when you're sort of in that circle, don't be shocked. There could be an Air Supply. There could be an Air Supply sighting sooner than either you or I could possibly realize,
Well, that's amazing. How about Triumph?
Triumph, wow, that's an obscure reference for a lot of people. The Canadian power trio of doom. No, I've never met those guys. I'd love to meet those guys.
Interesting. They live in my town, actually.
Oh, do they really? Wow. Okay.
Them and here's an old 80s group for you, Platinum Blonde.
Platinum Blonde, sure. I remember them.
Mark
Were
Holmes
they-
is a real estate agent. They actually live here. One passed away, though, a few years ago.
Oh, that's great. Wow. Were they on Epic Records? Was Platinum Blonde on Epic Records? I'm drawing a blank now. I know them from back in the day. Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, we got a lot of Canadian musicians here.
Yeah.
We just got word that Ronnie Hawkins passed away, and one of my friends that I
That's
know actually knows him or knew him.
That's
through
right. That's right.
Heartland Brothers.
That's right. One of the all-time greats who went on to start the band, who became, Bob Dylan's backing band, everything. Like what? It all started with Ronnie Hawkins and the Hawks.
Yeah.
That was the band.
Do you think it's true that the bass attracts you, or do you think you're attracted to the bass?
Well, it's become a mutual admiration society after all these years. But again, it sort of spoke to me. I don't know if it's the register, the language. As I'm listening to music, the music I grew up listening to was a lot of like Southern soul music, Motown, Stax, Sam and Dave, and the bass lines were always very prominent in those records. Stevie Wonder. I could always, kind of sing the bass lines even as a kid. Sly and the Family Stone, that kind of stuff.
Oh my goodness!
That stuff. The bass is so prominent in those records. So again, it just kind of resonated with me, and that's part of the music that I hear before lyrics. Even like I understand that there's somebody singing and they're speaking about something that's very near and dear to their heart, but I don't hear the lyrics first. I'm listening to the arrangement, the groove, the bass, the drums, and then like, oh yeah, the words are good too. But I get there later.
But have you ever written any of the songs or lyrics with many of the people you played with, or is it just simply, hey, Ivan, come play with us? Okay, sure.
Yeah. Most of those gigs, the stuff that sits on the resume is all stuff that I've been hired as a hired gun to sideman to come back them up kind of thing. The stuff that I write, my compositions, my solo stuff, I do with most of it's been with a recording trio that I've had in the New York area. And then during the pandemic, when it was shut down, suddenly everybody was out of work. Everybody was sitting home. So I got people, we did all these tracks back and forth by email. I got friends of mine from all over the world playing, Indian sitar and tabla and a guitar player from Atlanta and a percussionist, horns, like all these people that I would never have had on my recording suddenly were like ready to chime in and play on my original stuff because we were all just dying to stay creative while we were sitting home for 15 months,
Yeah.
Making lemonade out of lemons kind of thing.
But weren't you doing what other sopranos and tenors and band members and singers were doing, is that they were producing online and YouTube channels like Chris Mann and all those others? Were you doing that too?
Yeah, a lot of stuff. The YouTube stuff I did, because I also was shooting my own amateur videos to go along with the music, to have some visuals to go along with it. So I put up that. I put up man, it's hundreds of episodes of stuff now. Like I read all of the chapters from my book, and I read them all sort of live as YouTube clips. I was doing a podcast version of that. Beyond that, all the original music's got accompanying visuals that go along with it too. So yeah, we were doing everything we could to try to stay busy and stay creative, really, while we were being limited, not being able to go out and work and play in front of audiences, which was what we love to do.
Well, how about now? Are you able to start doing that again?
It's been very busy. It picked up last summer. I can tell you when it was. It was June 5th. It was the first weekend in June last year, because there was a year, almost a year and a half of like weddings that had been canceled or postponed. So suddenly there was like this whole backlog of people. So like the wedding business last year exploded.
Wow.
And this year, again, same thing. Like, the concerts have started. I played with Little Anthony and the Imperials last weekend at the Mohegan Sun Casino. I did 2 weddings the weekend before that. I've got a wedding coming up this weekend. Yeah, it's on. Like I've been as busy as I can possibly be, and I'm booked already through the end of the year for the most part.
That's a good thing. Have you ever got to the point where you played with so many bandmates you just want to go home, go to sleep, rest, or take a walk or whatever?
Yeah, every night.
Well, they say drop the mic. They say drop the guitar. How about that?
Yeah, every night after the show, you're like, I gotta take a nap. I'm exhausted, And a lot of what we do is travel too. Like, the gig is that's the fun part. The sitting in traffic for 3 hours to get up to the casino last weekend, that was the tough part. The 90 minutes on stage was just pure joy. And then right after the show, I got back in the car and another 2.5 hours getting back home. So yeah, I was exhausted, but not from the performance, from the travel,
What about fans? Like, do you get an annoyance of fans, or do you appreciate them, or do you get like your clothes torn off by these pretty girls? Or
yeah, that hasn't happened. No removal of clothing yet. I'm sort of interesting. I'm sort of so not famous that at the very best case scenarios that somebody has recognized me from something. And to me, it's always very interesting to find out what they've recognized me from. And, so they say, because they come up to me and they're kind of like, hey, didn't you? And I'm thinking to myself, oh, did you see me play at Carnegie Hall, or did you see me play on the Conan O'Brien show? What is it? And they say, no. And they invariably come up with some bar gig with a singer-songwriter that I'm embarrassed to have been seen with. And I say, I saw you play with so-and-so. And I'm like, yeah, that was me too, because I do all of it. And then the other thing that happens is I get mistaken for other people because, I'm a big guy, got long hair, I'm carrying a guitar through an airport, and they go, hey, aren't you? And I'm like, nope. Whoever you think I am, nope, I'm definitely not that guy.
Are you James Taylor?
Yeah, right. Nope, definitely not. Gene Simmons. I get mistaken for a lot of people. I'm like, really? Do you think I look like Gene? No. Okay, it's the hair, I guess. I get it.
Yeah, I remember one of my girlfriends. She was mistaken for Sandra Bullock in a clothing store.
Okay.
And I said, you were. Well, you know what? That's interesting. And if they asked for your autograph, would you sign it, Sandra Bullock? She goes, yeah, I would.
Of course. If they're that convinced, Yeah. We were on a train once. We were going down to Washington, D.C., and I was traveling with a band. And the band looked a lot more, quote unquote, average looking, a little more normal than me. I was definitely the odd man out, the rock and roller in the group, right? So in those days, in recent days, I should say, you have to have now an ID to get your Amtrak ticket. So my name is on my ticket now, right? So the conductor goes by and he collects the tickets and he stamps the tickets, right? And he comes back in a few minutes and he says, hey man, can I have your autograph? Can you sign the ticket, right? So clearly he's had time to go up front and Google my name to sort of look at the website and see, who he thinks I am, which is fine. I'm happy to sign the ticket. I'm like, yeah, great to see you. And because of that, there was a couple, like a woman and her son in the seat in front of us. They turned around and said, oh, can we have your autograph too? Can we get pictures with you? We have all of your albums. And the band that I'm with is cracking up. They're like, who do you think he is? Like they're dying to know We never find out who they had me, confused with. But I took pictures, signed autographs, the whole thing. Great to see you. Thanks so much for your support. I'm not going to burst anybody's bubble, but I have no idea who they thought I was. It's great.
Yeah. Play with it. But yeah, like everyone has the same name as somebody else. And I bet you there's another Avril Lavigne out there who's probably getting mistaken.
Sure. Well, it only kind of works if you're calling up on the phone and they can't see you and you're trying to make a restaurant reservation or something. Then they go, oh.
So does that bother you being identified, or you prefer not to be recognized? So even if they don't think you know who they are, like
it's part of the business. It's part of the job. Like ostensibly, we're all trying to be as famous as possible, which means we're inviting that kind of, potential recognition, or if it's an intrusion, into our lives as part of what we do. So it's absolutely part of the job, and it's fine. I'm always happy to talk to people about music or whatever they're excited about, whether they think that I'm the actual person they think I am or not. Sometimes they are, because people do see me because I do perform a lot, but it's fame is a very tenuous thing. I talk about it in my book, like if you're Janet Jackson level famous, and back in the day, she would sell like 10 million copies of her record, right? But that in the United States, that means that there are 320 million other people who don't know who you are and don't care. So she's ultra famous, but there's, my parents had never heard of her. You know what I mean? So fame it's a funny thing. So I never, I'm a long way from ever thinking that I'm going to be well known anywhere other than perhaps at the stage door of a theater I've just played at and they've just seen me at. It's like, oh, you're the guy on stage. Yes, I am. Thank you very much.
Well, even though you're asked to go play for a certain band, do you still have to practice in front of them, even though you're the one they want? You still have to.
Well, usually at this point, if you've been hired because you've been recommended. If it's not something that you know personally, and most of it, like you say, looking back, and you see that I played with 50 Rock and Roll Hall of Famers. I didn't start out by knowing any of them. By one foot in front of the other, you play with this one, then you meet that one. You play with that one, you meet this one. So most of it is by word of mouth. It's by personal recommendation. The very few things that I've had to quote unquote audition for. And a couple of the times that I've had to audition, I've blown it. Like, I don't work well under pressure when it's kind of like, oh, they're judging me. What are they going to think of how I play? So auditions have not gone well for me. But that said, I've still got to prepare the music. So if they have charts that they've given me, sometimes they just give me a recording. I got to write my own charts. I have to show up at the sound check performance ready. And that takes quite a bit of prep time right here in my home studio, which you're seeing behind you. I just sit here at my desk and I got my iPad right here and I put all my charts on my iPad, and like I write my little transcriptions of all the songs.
Wow.
And it takes hours and hours, so that when I show up at the gig, they think, oh, this guy, he's known the music all along. I'm like, well, it's a cool magic trick that I pull off, for the benefit of my employers. And if I do it sufficiently well enough, then hopefully they'll A, call me back, or B, recommend me to another one of their friends. Say, this guy came in and knew all the songs. Like, that's my job.
Well, what if you're called forth to play with a certain band, you realize these guys are good and I'm not, I don't want to be here? Or do you have an attitude, let's do it, let's party?
Well, hopefully I'm not in over my head.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? That's an uncomfortable feeling. And I've certainly had that feeling before. And there are a couple of things that I've been called for where I've kind of recognized, like, I may not be the guy you want for that. Like if it's a heavy classical piece on bowed upright bass, I'm not the guy for that. That's not my training. That's not my skill set, But most everything else, usually I've got like at least a handle on it. And again, if they've come at me, they've usually got me on a recommendation from somebody else who's seen me do something similar. So it's usually not, I'm not usually going to embarrass myself. And again, the other way not to embarrass yourself is by doing the prep work I was just talking about. Like if you spend the time really shedding the music and learning how to play their songs, then you'll probably be okay, which is not to say I haven't had my butt handed to me numerous times, on a stage, but not too many because, the homework is really important.
Well, how long does it take you to, yeah, the homework? Like, how long does it take you to learn one of their songs? And what if you strum the wrong string or you give
Mm.
an A instead of a B? How do you
Oh
deal
yeah.
with that?
Well, they'll tend to give you a look, like when you messed up, because they turn around and go, "Hey, man," I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, sorry." And hopefully, if they're within good humor, and that the A that you've incorrectly played is less than 2% of the entire correct notes you have played, then they'll kind of laugh and go with you. But if it's a lot of repeated mistakes, then it can be a problem, and they won't like it. So what I do if I have a recording, if they give me sheet music to work with, I start working with the sheet music and either make my own notes. Sometimes I recopy it, and play along with the recordings. If they're just giving me a recording, I'll sit down and I'll transcribe the bass line that they have, whoever played it in the studio, perhaps, and I'll write the whole thing out: chord changes, song form, verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, write the whole thing out so that I have it in front of me in traditional notation. And usually, if I've done that in the process of writing it out, it's kind of how I start to memorize the piece. You know what I'm saying? Like it's my way of sort of internalizing the music. And then once I get on stage with them, if I have the iPad in front of me, clamped to the mic stand, so it's not so conspicuous, I can really look like I know what I'm doing and play many more correct notes than incorrect notes, because we all make mistakes. But you want to, if the thing feels good, if the pocket is good, the groove is good, and you're playing much more of the right notes than the wrong ones, usually you'll be fine.
Do you still get
Usually.
nervous on stage?
Not too much. Not too much. I've been up there so many times for so many years, so many hours. There are certain instances where you get nerves, and that's kind of situation sort of depends on who's watching. Like if there's a TV camera in your face and a million people are on the other side of it, that can tend to get in your head a little bit. Or if you're in a Broadway pit, if you're coming into sub for the very first time and the conductor's never heard you before, and you've got to do, a rehearsal. There's no rehearsal. You have to do a live performance in front of a paid audience with no mistakes, top to bottom, perfect. That's nerve wracking because that's a lot of pressure to have on yourself, and you can really get in your head about it. And sometimes by the second or third song, you'll just be sitting in the chair with the cold sweats going, I don't want to be here. This is not fun. I don't like this at all. But then once you sort of survive that first performance at a new show and start to do a couple more shows, you get comfortable with the people around you, you get familiar with the music, and then it can be just a blast, a whole lot of fun. So, but not, stage fright, not so much, not per se, not anymore.
That's very interesting. I was wondering if maybe the temperature of the building has anything to do with it, or is it?
It can.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can. Yeah. Yeah, if it's too cold, the hands don't work as well,
Mm.
So like I was doing an outdoor job, a concert stage, way on the tip of Long Island, Montauk Point, all the way to the far eastern tip. And it was in New York City, it was like 90 degrees that day. But out on Montauk, it was like 65 degrees. This is Fahrenheit, sorry. So, and this is also like a really stiff, like 20-mile-an-hour breeze. So it was like 65, and I was wearing a t-shirt and shorts because I just come from a city that was blazing hot.
Oh,
And I
wow.
realized like I'm way too cold to play a concert right now. And I had like a tuxedo jacket in my car because I'd played a wedding the night before.
Wow.
So I did this show in a tuxedo jacket and shorts just to be able to keep warm enough to keep my hands, so that I could execute the music that I was also reading from the iPad, on this concert stage. So you just never know. Yeah, temperature can affect you for sure.
Yeah. And also, is it true that when a musician is playing a bass guitar or keyboardist or drummer, do they have like wireless earbuds so that it can hear the changes?
Ah,
And
that
who is that
depends.
that's speaking in the air? Is it the manager in the background, the stagehand, or is it one of the band members who's singing? Said, "Listen, can you, hey Ivan, can you please change that little that E to a B? Because who is that actually?"
I tell you, I've seen every possible different combination of what you're just talking about. What the in ear, those are called in ear monitors. We have
Mhm.
those now, and it depends on the production level. Some shows, uh, don't have those. The Broadway shows almost always have those, and the conductor will have a headset mic. It can be talking to you in your ear and saying that like exactly what you're saying. Like Ivan, a little more staccato there, a little more legato. Like I've gotten some live, in person, real time coaching during shows sometimes. But usually, what's in those monitors is whatever you would have on your floor wedges in front of you. So you want to be able to hear, because believe it or not, as loud as rock bands can be, sometimes if you're across the stage, the guitar player is 20 feet away from you, and his amp is facing toward the audience, you can't hear him. So you need some guitar in your monitor to be able to hear what this person, because you've got a loud drummer in between you, to be able to hear what's going on. So in what's happening in the inner monitors, you're having the same mix that you would have on your floor wedges. So what I'll have in my in-ears is I'll have my voice if I'm singing, bass guitar, and then whatever I'm missing, like whatever's on the other side of the stage. If the keyboard's over there, the guitar's over there, I want to have them in my monitor. But if I'm next to the drummer, don't need drums in my monitor, I'm good. If I'm next to the guitar, for another second guitar player, I got plenty of that. I don't need that in my ears. So each individual mix, those in-ear monitors allows you to have your own personal individual mix, so you can hear what you need to hear to be able to have a more successful performance. And usually it's vocals. You want to hear your singing.
That's very interesting. But then you're going with the fact that what if one of those earpieces has stopped functioning? You have to play blind. That's the issue.
Yeah, it's a problem. I had an exact instance of that. I was playing the Broadway show Rock of Ages, which is the 80s hair rock musical. It was so much fun. So the band was all on stage in costume, in makeup, the whole thing. We had crazy shenanigans we were doing. So for the curtain call, the end of the show, we're playing Don't Stop Believing for like 7 minutes at the end. There's like the bows, the cast, the finale, the whole thing. And then the cast leaves the stage. And then our thing was, we were the band. We jump down off the risers and we come down to the front of the stage. We finish the song up there, right? So the guitar players are both wireless. They had wireless in-ears and wireless guitars, so they could go anywhere. The bass, for whatever reason, they had it on a hard wire. So I was on a 20-foot lead, basically. So I couldn't get more than 20 feet down in front of the riser. And one of the first times I did it, somehow the wire had gotten wrapped around one of the footlights. So when I jumped off the riser, I got to the end of my tether way earlier than I thought I needed. It jerked my head back.
No.
And when it did, it pulled out my in-ears.
Oh no!
So I had to play the end of the song kind of by braille. Like I could hear some ambience, so I knew the bass was still going out into the room, but I couldn't really hear anything I was playing. I just had to do it by looking at the finger patterns and remembering how the song went, and it was very funny. I'm like, that's comedy right there.
Yeah, that makes you a good bass player when you can able to do that.
It happens, for whatever reason, if a piece of equipment fails or something happens that, many times I've had to finish a song or sometimes the end of a show, not really hearing what I'm doing and just having to have faith. It's going out there. Just keep moving your hands the way that that you're supposed to be moving them. And hopefully you're communicating, not screwing the show up.
Yeah. So tell us the equipment that you bring with you. Is it just a bass guitar? Do you bring anything else with you besides your iPad and your bass guitar?
It depends on the show. On the show. So I have a small combo amplifier. Combo meaning the head and the cabinet, the speaker, all in one box. It's only about 15 by 15 square cube, but it's super loud. It's like 300 watt amp. So that stays in my car all the time. So I use that for any gig where I need my own amp, weddings, funerals, bar mitzvahs, any of that kind of stuff. Sometimes the big concert stages, especially if it's like a festival stage, they'll have a setup on stage already. So all the bands will come on, they'll play through the same bass amp, same drums, same guitar amps, right? So in those situations, you just bring your bass on and plug into the house amp and try to dial in a sound as quickly as you can. In a Broadway pit, typically these days, there are no amps. Everything's running direct. So it's running direct through a box called a Sans amp, which has an amp simulator in it. And even the guitars, like they're running through amp simulators. And those are all going into the headphones. So everybody's playing on headphones. The drummer is typically like in an isolation booth. So the stage volume, the pit volume, the stage volume is like next to zero down there.
Yeah, I noticed that drummers are separated in this kind of like glass booth. Like, is that
Yeah.
just because of the sound? Because it's too
It's
loud?
too loud. It's too
Wow.
loud. Well, it's not only that they're too loud, but the biggest problem is, when you're hitting a snare drum, it's
Mhm.
so loud that what it does is it pollutes every microphone on the stage. Like
Ooh.
sometimes it'll go right into the singer's mic, it can go right into the guitar player's mic. So it becomes very hard from the front of house to control the mix, the balance of the instruments, because the snare drum just goes into everything. So often, there's a lot of acts right now. You'll see them on stage. There's like a plexiglass shield in front of
Mhm.
the drummer, like a sneeze shield at a salad bar, right? And that's strictly to prevent all that sound pressure from getting into the lead singer's mic,
Oh,
so
wow.
they can keep the lead vocals nice and loud on stage, and also to help the lead singer be able to hear their monitors or their in-ears, so they don't have to crank their volume on their headphones so loud to get over the sound of a snare drum, which is so loud, or cymbals too.
So
So
you
it's
mean,
just,
go ahead.
yeah, it's strictly just to control the balance
Mm.
of the instruments out in front, and also to make the singers especially more comfortable on stage, so they don't feel like they're trying to shout over a drum kit because they're so
So
loud.
something like this doesn't work then? You can't, like, no matter what you put in the microphone. Isn't there, well, there's
Well,
noise canceling headphones, but aren't there noise canceling mics?
what you're holding now, that's called a pop screen.
Yeah.
So what that does is that changes this sound pop, 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 going into the mic. It diffuses that sound, so it doesn't make such as big a spike into the mic. But that doesn't help you. A snare drum, again, is like 110 decibels when you hit it, like when you
Oh,
really
wow.
lean into it. So there's no amount of pea popper that's going to that's going to protect you from the sound of a snare drum. It gets into every mic on stage. It's a sound man's nightmare sometimes.
Have they been using the glass booth for drummers uh, for a while now? Is that a new invention? Because I don't see it in any of the bands of the 50s or 60s. They never used it.
That's true. That's true. I think it started to show up. I'd say 80s when
Hmm.
they started to do that, when they tried to get the sound separation. But it's definitely been around 30 or 40 years. I've seen them around, those plexiglass shields, and more they're starting to like them now. But also the thing you have to remember about the doo-wop groups and the 60s groups, they were not playing that loud. Like if you see the Beatles, what the amplifiers that they had on stage at Shea Stadium, it's like this little, 30-watt, 100-watt guitar amplifier, like these tiny amplifiers. The wall of sound, those big stacks of Marshalls, that didn't show up until like the Who and those,
The
you, you
Who,
know,
wow.
right? People of that era. That's when they started like having that crazy stage volume. So back in the days, like the drummer wasn't hitting that hard behind the Shirelles or Wilson Pickett. He wasn't slamming that hard as they became in later years. So you didn't have to have that kind of plexiglass shield. And also the sound systems weren't as technologically developed in those days either. They weren't miking everything. They would sometimes just have a couple of mics, like one for the singer and one maybe over the drums, like one mic kind of thing. So the sound technology's changed a huge amount in those last 50, 60 years.
But I've seen that glass booth on, say, Duran, Blondie.
Sure. Yep.
So you thinking prior to 1983, they weren't using one then?
Not as much. Not as much. I don't remember seeing them around in those days. But again, like the stage volume started when the rock bands got bigger and the amps got bigger, the stage volume started to increase. So like Blondie, you just mentioned, like I know a couple of guys in that band, and Clem Burke, the drummer with Blondie, he is a beast. He plays so hard and loud. He's a great, great musician. But again, like if there were no plexi between him and Debbie's mic, like from Debbie's mic, first off, all you would hear was more drums. And second off, even with her monitors and her in-ear monitors as loud as they can go, she still would be having to scream over, one of the loudest drummers in rock and roll history. And it's like, trying to save her own voice so she can continue to sing every night. If you're on tour, you're using those muscles in your throat, and you have to take care of yourself to be able to continue to do that night after night. So they put the plexiglass in front of Clem to keep Deborah's her voice healthy. And even the guitar amps on the Blondie stage, the last tour I saw, rather than facing 90 degrees toward the audience, they were facing kind of 45 degrees out. So they were
Wow.
facing away from Deborah. And also they had plexiglass baffles, small ones in front of the amps, deflecting that sound away from her and from her mic. Again, to keep that sound balance more in control in the front of house engineer, and also to make her be able to survive vocally with that louder rock band for what, 45 years they've been doing it.
Yeah, I remember when Blondie first came out, she was already like 35 years old. Now she's like almost 80. I think she's 75, 76 something.
She's in her mid 70s and she sounds wonderful. She sounds
How long do you
amazing.
think she can continue with this?
I work with people older than her, man. I was working with little Anthony and the Imperials last weekend. Anthony's 81. Looks like he's in no condition to stop anytime soon. It's like I'm working with people into their 80s all the time now. So and the Rolling Stones, look at Mick and Keith. They should have been dead years ago, but
yeah,
they're still going because they love the music. They love what they do.
I've never gotten an answer to this, but why are people using, especially someone like Robbie Williams or Michael Bublé, why are they using the old 50s style mics these days? And not the newest ones that everyone's supposed to, like you're using, and this can be also a music mic
right
as well.
I'll tell you a secret about those mics. They're made by Shure. I forget, the old one was like the number was like the 55 or something. Like this is the 58. This is the vocal standard that everybody uses now. So they're making an aesthetic choice. They want to look like they're singing like Elvis, basically, right? On all the stars from those years, like Sinatra, the people that use those mics, because they look cool. They look much cooler than these. But check this out. In this modern era, the Shure company who makes those mics said, we have a better capsule in the mic now. So they're putting the new capsules in those old housings. So those mics look old, but they sound new now. So that's why they're doing them. They sound great now. But they look cool. They look cool.
I heard the Shure was pretty good. Yeah, they do look cool. I might consider getting one as well. I'll show
you. Look cool, man.
Yeah, I'll show you. Someone knew that I like music and I sing a lot. I'm a tenor and everything, so they gave me this.
There you go. Look at that. Wow.
It's not real though. It's just like a thing you would receive it's like the musician's version of an Oscar, I think.
Got it. That's nice.
But
great. It's one of those old microphone housings. Yeah. It's beautiful.
And they knew I liked that. Actually, hold on.
Well, that's the thing. You know immediately how cool that looks.
Yeah. Sorry, my pad just suddenly went off. Yeah, I like it. And it's like, Lola. Oh, how does this look? Yeah, does that look like
that's what I'm saying. It instantly looks cool. That's why those guys use those mics, because it immediately looks cool. It evokes a bygone era, of great musical styling. That's why they use it.
So what do you think of the mics Madonna uses and Britney Spears? They go like around their ear and they go like right in front so they can gallivant and dance on the stage. Like, what do you think of those?
I think those are genius because, when I work on Broadway, they have different versions of those little headset mics. There's some of them are this little tiny wire that comes down. There's a little tiny capsule here.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a capsule that just sits right in your widow's peak right here. It's called a bindi mic, and because then these actors can speak their lines, they can sing, they can dance. It's not about having to have a handheld microphone in your face the whole time. And so much of, a show like Madonna's has always been based on, or I should say based on, but a huge feature has always been the choreography. Mm-hmm. Like she's got a band, but she's also got professional dancers with her all the time. So people, and Britney too, the people want to see the choreography that became standard really when MTV started. 1981, suddenly when people could see the music, then people started doing, the V formation dances like Michael Jackson. They always had a gang of professional dancers with them, and Madonna's got them still. And I think that's a great way to mic a singer who's also a dancer, Yeah,
and I notice it's flesh color too, because it probably hides itself, so it doesn't look like you're using a mic.
I think that, I think everybody can still see the mic. So when I see that, I go like, all right, I get it why you're doing that. But, I might as well just, I say go for it. Like just show the people the gear that you're using because I think it's cool to know how the technology works rather than to try to hide it. But everybody can see it. You know what I mean?
So when you play the bass guitar, do you do a lot of the like Robbie Williams would take the mic and he would rock it back and forth, and Britney Spears would dance? What about you? Who do you think loses more energy? The one who are playing guitar and dancing, or the ones that sing and dance? Like,
It depends on the musician. Some people put out a lot of energy on stage. Some people just stand there and sing. We call that a park and bark. They just stand up and put no more energy than they have to. Me personally, I like to move around. Like I feel the music that I'm playing is rhythm based, and also my role in the band is to help keep the time. The bass guitar, excuse me, the bass guitar is the bridge between the rhythm and the harmony. So I'm locking in with the kick drum very often, playing that rhythm, and I'm also playing the chord changes that the guitar player, the keyboard is playing. So I'm kind of the bridge between the two. So I'm always feeling the time somewhere in my body, which means I'm always tapping a foot. I'm always,
nice.
bopping around. Hopefully I'm not distracting, but I'm trying to feel the music and stay metronomic with it and keep the groove. Because, a lot of the music that we play was originally recorded for dancing. So if we can see people that are dancing, that means that we're doing our job. They're enjoying it. It's speaking to them. So, a little dancing on stage, I think, is probably a good thing.
Yeah. I was reading a little bit and I couldn't figure out whether is it the bass guitar is the only instrument you know, or can you sing? Can you play the drums? Can you play keyboard?
I'm a terrible drummer. Not to say that I haven't played drums in my life. I'm a terrible piano player, but I played a rock classical crossover piece once called the rock concerto. I also had these keyboard parts that I had to play. So we performed live in Carnegie Hall. So I have played keyboards, I should say, live in Carnegie Hall. I can put that on my resume. I'm in no way qualified to have done so. I only know these 5 chords that I learned in sequence, and if I had to start over, I had to go all the way to the beginning. I couldn't. I can play a little bit of guitar, and my rhythm. If you're talking like 3 chords, sort of slasher guitar, I'm kind of good at that. I do sing backup on a lot of my gigs, which I enjoy a lot. But my bread and butter, what people pay me to do, is play bass guitar. The other stuff is either for my personal enjoyment or as a little added benefit, if they've hired me and I can double on something else.
How many bass guitars do you own, my friend?
Oh man, I'd have to turn my camera around and show you, but I got about 20 of them here on the wall.
Wow.
Looks like a music store. My problem is I can't sell any of them. So, this is, 30 years, 40 years of guitar collecting.
Wow.
So, I still have the first one that I ever bought, and I love them all. I think I've probably only sold maybe 1 or 2 in my entire career. So they just kind of accrue. They're slightly different sizes and different colors and different flavors and different sounds, and I really only play 2 of them regularly. Got the whole collection, and 2 of them stay in regular rotation.
And is the weight of them, does it prevent you from playing the way you want? Like, does it matter how heavy it is or light it is? Do you play the same way?
I've got an 8-string bass made by this company called Alembic, and it's an Explorer body. It's got like kind of these long angular sort of wings on it. It weighs a ton. This thing is like strapping a coffee table to your stomach. It's so hard to get, it'll exhaust you within, a 45-minute set of music. I've got a guitar strap that's like 4 inches wide to try to distribute the weight. It's so heavy. It's ridiculous. And then I've got another one, which is made by Gretsch. That's a hollow body instrument, which has a different kind of resonance to it. And it's just, it's like a feather, it feels like I'm wearing nothing at all. So usually I'm somewhere right in the middle. A standard Fender precision bass is probably 8 or 9 pounds strapped around your shoulder. And I've gotten pretty used to that. One of my trap muscle on my left side is much bigger than my trap muscle on my right side, just because of where the strap sits, after years of doing it. But Yeah, within a certain range, weight isn't a problem. But when you start to get to the either end of that range, it gets really interesting.
Well, why the Fender? Why not a Martin or a Taylor or?
That's a fine question. I've experimented with so many different basses over the years. Like there was a period starting in the 90s where I was playing exclusively 5-string basses with a low B string on them. And I had a company down in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where I'm from, called Warrior Instruments, who made me like 3 gorgeous custom built exotic hardwoods, these beautiful basses. And I used them for years and years and years and years. And then when I was getting hired to do was go on the road and be music director for Martha Reeves and the Vandellas, or Sam Moore from Sam and Dave. And all
Oh
of those
wow!
records were cut at Stax and at Motown, were all cut on a Fender Precision bass. That's the sound of all those records. So when I was sort of wanting to be more authentic to the music that I was being hired to play, I said, you know what? I love all these 5 strings, but you know what really worked for me is the Fender. So I started on a Fender P bass. That was the first one I ever got. And I, went full circle. And about maybe 10, 15 years ago, I went back to Fenders and I've been using them almost exclusively. That said, anytime I have to play the 5-string, I bring out the Warriors again. I got them. I love them. I had a 5-string gig the other night. I was subbing at a Broadway show that was all 5-string in the book. So I brought the Warrior. Warrior has appeared on Broadway, but as soon as I got home, I put the Fender right back in the gig bag. So that's what's going out with me on Wednesday for the next show.
I'm kind of going to ask you another question, but I'm sort of confused about the 6-neck guitar. What's that all about?
Again, that's show business, man. That's just for shits and giggles, as they say. That I think
Really?
you're referring to the one that Rick Nielsen built for Cheap Trick.
It's got
I think
like
it's like
4, yeah.
Yeah, he's got a 5-neck guitar,
Yeah.
and it was just for the ostentatiousness, just for the outrageousness of saying, "Look what I can do! Check this out." You've seen a double neck guitar; those are semi-common.
Yeah.
People will have a double neck guitar. He's like, "I got 5," and when he goes in concert, it's a giant instrument. His roadie has to come and like put it on him, and he plays all 5 necks just because he can, just because it looks funny. It's almost like a sight gag that he does as
Wow.
part of the stage show. But he's also such a great musician that you don't, if you close your eyes, you wouldn't know what he's playing, because he's playing amazing guitar on all 5 of the necks on the guitar. But it's just a gag. It's a visual gag, I think, more than anything.
Now you say that you prefer the Fender, but you don't prefer the Taylors and the Martins, or the Gibson even is another one.
Sure.
I'm looking at this company name for all your gear. You don't use PV. You use something called Tech 21. Why is that?
PV, I still have a PV fretless bass that's standing up right here. As a matter of fact, I have it. So I definitely have used PV gear throughout my life, because they're from the Southeast. They're from Mississippi, which is not that far from where I grew up. PV gear was a big part of my development, my formative years, I should say. Now, that said, the Tech 21 stuff, that's the company that makes the Sans amp. They have a box now that's about this big. It's about 12, 14 inches long, 4 inches wide. It's tiny. It's called the Fly Rig. And I think the reason why they call it is because you fly with it. You take it on the airplane with you. It's got all of my effects in it, all of my signal processing, all of my amp simulation, all of a tuner, a direct box. Like sometimes if I'm doing a gig that's I'm flying to, with certain artists, they'll put a Fender bass on the rental rig. So I won't even bring a bass. I'll just bring the Fly Rig. I'll just bring the Tech 21 box with me. And I have my sound with me. It's in this tiny box. It's amazing what it does. It's beautiful.
Well, you breathe music, you live music, you eat music. Is it easy to separate the music from the Ivan and just Ivan, the person who just lives his life?
I think we're one and the same at this point. Like, it's been so much for so long. Like, almost everything I'm doing is gig related somehow. So, yeah, I think we're one and the same at this point.
Okay.
I do the music, and the music is me, and it's all one.
That's excellent. I want to touch on a little bit of what inspired you to write your memoir. The name of the book, Am I Famous Yet? What's that one about?
Right. That is called Am I Famous Yet? The subtitle is Memoir of a Working Class Rock Star,
Hmm.
because that's kind of how I see myself and my role in the world. Like I definitely get to stand next to rock stars sometimes, and stand next to people who are famous, but I work for a living. I definitely lift my own amps. I do all my own, technical work, do all my own driving, transportation kind of thing. So, yeah, I've got a lot of fun stories to tell that, as I would be backstage, if something weird would happen on a gig, backstage between soundcheck and the show, it would remind me of a story of something even weirder that happened on another gig, and I would tell them these stories to the band I was with. And after a while, they realized I just had so many of them. It's like, you should really write a book of this stuff. I was like, yeah, maybe I could actually. And I wrote most of it about 4 years ago. I think I sort of sat down and collected a whole bunch of road stories, strange things that had happened. And then during the pandemic, again, when we were sitting home for 15 months doing nothing, I had time to really finish it, edit it, get it copy edited, get it formatted, get it put out. Had the time to do it finally. So that's kind of how that came to be. It was sort of a combination of intent and circumstances, being handed to us. So I'm really happy with the way it came out. People have been responding to it well. They've all seemed to enjoy it, that have read it, that I've heard from. So it's been a fun thing.
Yeah, I can imagine the stories that you have in there. I can't wait to read it. So what about your family? Like how do they treat you? Do they treat you like, oh, my husband or brother is a rock star? Or they just say, Ivan, put the garbage out now.
Oh
Put that
yeah, no,
car
no.
down.
There's absolutely no rock star in this shit at home. They know who I really am. They've seen me. They know. There's no mystique here anymore. And I every time I've heard any movie star interviewed, they all say the same thing. Like the kids at home, they don't want them. They're not impressed. They don't want to hear from it. They know who you really are.
Yeah, except you have to, when you're playing an instrument, you're playing a band or you're a singer, you have to look good in front of your audience. But as soon as you're at home, hey, I don't care if you're Michael Bublé, put the garbage out.
Yeah, the hair goes up in the ponytail. I got to wash the dishes. Like it's my
Yeah,
life. It's all good, man.
yeah. Do you have any members of your family who are musical as well?
I really don't. I really don't. There was like my parents were, both of them, almost tone deaf.
Oh,
Like they
wow.
could barely carry a tune. They were both big fans of music. My mother loved Gladys Knight and the Pips and Stevie Wonder and the Beatles and all these soul acts that she used to listen to. Ike and Tina Turner.
Wow.
And my dad was very heavily into like classical music, like Baroque classical music, like Vivaldi and Bach and stuff like that. So, and he deeply loved it, but he wasn't musical himself. Didn't play. None of my parents played. I've been told my grandfather played trombone in the Navy shipyard band, but that was well before I knew him. Like by the time I knew him, he had nothing to do with music. So I don't know if it's in the genes. It was certainly not in the actions of the people that I saw growing up. So that was I guess I'm a rebel in that regard. I picked it up on my own.
Well, same with, like, I'm a tenor, and my vocal coach said I'm a baritone tenor because I can sing as low as this, and I can
Sure.
sing as low as the falsetto, and mid-tone range and everything. And another person in my family, my father, was an opera singer. Well,
Oh
not
wow.
he didn't. He wasn't an opera singer, but he could have been. But he decided to do a regular engineer job, and
Right.
but he sounded really good. So I think I inherited my voice from him. Nobody else in my family, literally, like, when you say tone deaf, the medical term is called amusia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so, Ivan, if what advice do you have for somebody who wants to learn to play the bass? Or
Oh yeah. My advice is, if you can do anything else, do that. but but if you feel like you're cursed and you must learn to do this, I don't know. I think that it's kind of a beautiful instrument in a lot of ways, in that it's kind of easy to get functional playing rock and roll on a bass guitar. Like you can sit down and pick out the 1 4 5 notes to play Wild Thing on your very first sitting
wow,
down with the instrument. Like you could play in a garage rock band pretty quickly, which I did. I certainly did. I think I played my first, high school talent show concert within probably 6 months of picking up the instrument. That said, it can be, and it has been, a lifelong pursuit to perfect and sort of, master some higher level music, learn to play jazz, learn to play classical, learn to play Broadway, that kind of stuff. That's taken a lifetime of study, which I'm still hoping to improve. I'm still working at it. But yeah, I think if you're at all inclined, get in there and give it a shot. Why not? What's the worst that can happen?
Yeah, that's true. Oh, how when they do, like, I've seen orchestras and bands play on Zoom, and each
Huh?
one has their own little video. How do they get that to work so they're all in sync? Do you know anything how that would work?
Very difficult. I think I don't think anyone's really truly figured it out how to do it online over the internet. But what I have seen, like especially in a Broadway pit, is sometimes the band will be in 3 or 4 different rooms in the theater. They'll be in separate areas. So there's a video camera on the conductor, and then there's a video monitor in the drum room, and a video monitor in the guitar room, and a video monitor in the violin room. So they're kind of all looking at each other through video monitors, which should be in real time. But as we know, there's a tiny little micro delay because of the electronics. So sometimes you can be just a hair behind. Like,
Oh.
for instance, when I subbed in the pit at Spider-Man, the conductor was in the room with the rhythm section band, where I was. But down the hall was a separate room with all the orchestral instruments, so that the violins and the horns, all the acoustic stuff was down the hall. And they were looking at her on the video screen. So when I was playing along with the rhythm section, I was watching her in real time live on the podium. But when I was playing along with the orchestral members down the hall, I would look at the screen.
Mm.
So I would see the same video delay that they were seeing to sort of be in better sync with them down the hall. It just sort of depended on, and it would switch from song to song what I had to do. So it's a chore to try to keep everything sounding like it's perfectly in sync. It's not easy
Oh,
sometimes.
wow. Yeah, it's got to be in sync. But I was under the impression that someone would do the video of them playing the guitar, and then they send it to that person, then they add theirs, and eventually you get
Yes.
7 or 8, and then they play it. I thought that would be the way to do it as well.
I've done that too, but that's certainly not live. That's you do that kind of as an additive recording, and video. I've certainly done those too. Yeah, exactly as you say. You record one part first, you send it on to the next person, they record their parts, and maybe add it into the video, send it on to the next person. And those can be really compelling and interesting. And during the pandemic, everybody tried to learn how to master that
Yeah.
technology because we weren't allowed to be in the same room together.
Mhm.
So we wanted to keep playing. So we had a lot of those compilation kind of videos. It was fun to do those.
When you play the bass guitar, especially in your little studio there, you
Yeah.
have the headset on.
Yeah.
How loud does it have to be in order for you to hear every note you're playing?
I'm pretty quiet at home. I try to keep the volume level at home as much as quiet as possible. In fact, I have an acoustic bass guitar also made by Fender. So it's got a sound chamber like a regular acoustic guitar. So it makes some sound, it kind of low volume, and I certainly hear that fine in the house. And if I'm playing along with a clip from YouTube or something like that, I can adjust the volume. So I try to keep the house volume pretty reasonable for my own hearing and also for my neighbors, because I live in an apartment building in New York City. So we don't want to blast out the neighbors either.
No. So what would happen if you just couldn't play anymore or something? Like, I know I've seen a guitar player play with no hands. I've seen a piano player play with only 2 fingers. I mean, I
Yeah.
guess it would be not impossible for you to play no matter what.
I think I would try to turn to some. Yeah, I don't know if that would be, if I lost my hands in an accident. I don't know what would be that scenario. But if for some reason I became, disabled through arthritis or something else, I think I would try to find some other creative related pursuit that would be maybe composing, or mixing, writing, producing, those kinds of things that don't necessarily require, 4 fingers on the neck of a Fender bass.
Yeah,
There's
I think
definitely things you could do. Yeah.
you could figure out.
Mhm.
Yeah, I know. What a question. I know. What would you be doing if you weren't a bass player?
I don't know, because I was in the music business before I became a musician, and I quit that sort of in disgust. I'm like, music business has nothing to do with music; it's all marketing, So I kind of ran out of things that I felt like I could do or wanted to do, and kind of put all my eggs in the musician basket, which is a big gamble because there was absolutely no guarantee you're going to be able to make a living doing that. And it kind of worked out in retrospect, but I don't know if I had to pick an alternate career path, what that would be, because I really kind of gave up on everything else to sort of do this,
Yeah, it must be quite difficult to play the bass guitar. One thing I don't understand, I know there are problems. One of them is a capo. I heard the capos, I guess you call them, are misleading. Can you explain that?
Yeah, they are misleading because they don't use them on bass too much, but they certainly use them on guitars quite a bit. So what happens is if you take that capo and you move it up to the third fret, suddenly like you can use all your chord shapes that you know for your open strings, but you use them using the capo as a so in other words, if you're playing a G chord with the shape that you know is a G chord, but you're playing it 3 frets in the wrong direction because of the capo allows you to do that. So you're still playing a G chord, but the world is hearing a B flat chord. So if I'm a bass player and I'm trying to follow a guitar player maybe it's a song that I don't know or something that I'm learning, and I see the G chord shape, I go like, okay, that's a G chord. But then I see the capo, I'm like, uh-oh, now we got a problem here. So you have to do a little internal math sometimes to figure out what key you're in. It can be very misleading when you see that on a guitar neck.
Yeah,
it's a head scratcher.
Why is there a need for compression?
Oh, okay. So compression, that's I learned a lot about compression over the pandemic because I was learning to become a mix engineer for my own home recordings. So what compression does is compression kind of shaves off the large spikes in a sound wave. When something comes through like really loud, it'll kind of shut the door on the top end of that spectrum. It can also raise the floor up of the quietest stuff. It can make the quietest stuff louder, and it can make the loudest stuff kind of softer. So it squeezes the range, the dynamic range of a signal, so it'll sit better in a mix. And also, so certainly a loud spike won't come through and damage your speakers, because it can cause physical damage to the equipment. So compression is a very subtle signal processing, but very necessary. Like it took me a long time to figure out what it does, how it works. Like there's 4 knobs on the compressor box. I'm like, I don't know what these knobs do. Makes no sense to me. But that's what I came to learn. It just evens out the signal, makes it less spiky and less dramatic, less drastic. Let's put it that way.
So what the heck did Marty McFly do then when he strummed that guitar and it go?
Yeah.
What's that all about?
Again, that's a sight gag,
Yeah. Oh, okay. That doesn't actually happen.
Well, you can blow up speakers. I've seen speakers catch on fire if they got
really?
if they got an electrical spike that goes into them at too high of a wattage. They're paper cone speakers. They will catch on fire. I've seen it happen. But hopefully, you've matched all of your equipment so that all of the speakers are rated to the amp that you have going through them. But in Back to the Future, they had a super powerful amp going through it. Crazy.
Do you take your guitar in to have it overhauled and cleaned and strings replaced, or do you do all that yourself?
I do most of it myself, but there's some stuff that I don't feel confident doing, like changing strings and adjusting my intonation at the bridge adjustments, adjusting the truss rod. I personally feel comfortable with that. I know some other musicians who are as experienced as I am who don't feel comfortable with that and take it to professional for the setups and stuff. But the stuff that's above my pay grade is like if pickups need to be replaced, rewired, resoldered, frets need to be redone, anything that requires like pliers and gluing and soldering irons, I give that. I have friends who are genius at that. I'm like, you guys do this. I can change the strings, but I need help with everything above that.
What are the solo challenges of a bass guitarist?
You mean for playing unaccompanied?
Like, do you play better as a solo act, or do you play better with a band?
I play better with a band. I think the bass is part of a rhythm section. I like playing with a drummer. I like playing with the keyboards, guitar, singers. And again, the music that I grew up listening to, if you look at all the Stax music, the house band is Booker T and the MGs. So it's guitar, organ, bass, drums, and horns, So that's the music I came up listening to. That's the stuff I enjoy playing. When they push me out front to do a bass solo, I can do it, and I can possibly entertain myself and maybe entertain some of the audience, but um, not for 90 minutes. It's going to be a very short show if it's going to be a solo bass performance. I work much better and much more happily in an ensemble.
Now, I don't know. You probably have calluses on your fingers. Do you think calluses on your fingers are better to play, or okay? And how about a pick? Do you prefer to play with a pick?
I play mostly fingerstyle, but I had to learn to play with a pick to actually, you know what, made me get my pick chops together was Spider-Man, the musical. There was some stuff in that book that was written for flat pick on a bass that really
That's
made me
cool.
have to learn that. So I've been playing with that technique quite a bit. I play mostly fingerstyle, and yeah, the calluses just kind of come naturally. It's painful at first for really only a very short while. But if you play with any regularity at all, the finger pads get pretty tough.
Yeah, and I was actually doing research on the actual strings themselves. A lot of them are very expensive. Anywhere from a set of 4 bass strings will cost around 25 to 6 string sets will cost like. What do you think is the average cost of strings, and how many do you get in a package?
It depends what you're buying for. A 4-string bass, you're going to buy a 4-string set. 5-string, you're going to buy a 5-string set.
Okay.
They are quite a bit more expensive than guitar strings because there's just a lot more material in them. There's a lot more steel in there, a lot more. And as such, you're absolutely correct. I never change my strings, almost hardly at all.
Oh, wow.
It's expensive. And I don't even pay for them a lot of times, too. I've had some string companies like DR Strings have been very kind to me and just given me sets for free. So, but even so, like I prefer the sound of a broken in string. It's a little deader sound, a little less bright, a little less sibilance in it, because it's a bass. It's a bass guitar. It's not supposed to be like real toppy, scratchy. I like the bottom sound. That comes with a more broken in, dead set of strings.
Oh yeah, bottom sound. Yeah. But so yeah, and also I've seen some really interesting sizes of bass guitars. Some have this really, really long neck, and I'm like, what? It's like a long neck. It's like 3-4
Right.
feet long. Like, what does that do? Is that for aesthetic reasons as well?
The standard. Okay, so the scale length, the standard Fender scale length is 34 inches, and that's from the bridge to the nut. That's the vibrating length of the string is 34 inches. Now, what you have beyond the nut is usually a headstock with tuning pegs on it. So that can be like, different designs. Some of them can be long, some of them can be V-shaped, some of them can be arrow-shaped, all that kind of stuff. So those can make the instrument look a lot longer than it is, but the practical vibrating string length is 34 inches. There are some basses that have a 35-inch scale length. Those, they think they sound a little deeper. There's some that have a 32-inch scale length. Those sound a little thuddier, like the Paul McCartney, the Beatle bass. That's a short scale bass kind of thing. They have a slightly different sound to them, like a slightly different resonance to them. But mostly, it's an optical illusion. Like most of them, most basses are like 34-inch scale length. They're almost all the same vibrating string. All the rest of it is just, bells and whistles and woodwork and fancy doodads.
And how about using effects? Do you use effects?
I do somewhat. I have a chorus effect that I use a bit, and I have like an envelope filter and an octave divider that I use quite a bit. But mostly those are all contained in that Sans Amp Fly Rig, the Tech 21 thing I was talking to you about before. Mostly what I use that for is for the amplifier simulation. So it sends a direct signal to the front of the house that makes it sound like it's playing through a beautiful vintage Ampeg B15 amp with a very expensive mic on it, So they get this gorgeous signal out to the mixing desk. So there's less for them to have to do with it to make it sound good out front. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I want to go back to that. You're saying about one of your guitars is very heavy. I can imagine you playing that for a whole gig.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
It hurts. It hurts. By the end of it, I'm really sore.
How do you keep that passion and that emotion going with a big heavy thing strapped to your chest?
Well, if I've chosen the instrument for the night, I've made a choice, and I know what I'm getting myself into. So I've taken it on 3 hour gigs before, and I
Wow.
knew what I was getting into. But I felt like, all right, I'm in shape. I ran 5 miles this morning. I'm good. My aerobics are good. I think my shoulder can stand it. And then by the end of the night, I'm just exhausted. 'Cause it's so heavy. But there's really only one of my basses that's that ridiculous. Most of them are kind of just sort of, medium size, medium weight, average.
What's the weirdest bass guitar you've ever seen? The weirdest
Oh
looking.
man, weirdest looking. I think I have 3 of them here.
Oh, okay.
This Explorer body thing I've got, that it's silver metal flake. It's got these kind of long angular wings on it.
Oh, wow.
They're pretty fancy. Pretty fancy. I got a couple of fancy ones, But
Was that
again, that's it's a visual thing. It's for it's for the lights. It's not for the sound.
Yeah, I was asking someone the other day about the Lego guitar.
Oh yeah.
That's actually playable.
Yeah. I don't know if I need one of those, but maybe I do. Maybe you build it yourself, I would assume, right?
I'm not sure, but there's a gentleman actually builds cigar box guitars as well.
Yes, I've
He
seen
sells
those.
them.
Yeah. Because that was the old blues guys. That's what they had. We got a broomstick and a cigar box, and we're gonna make sound somehow. And
The broomstick when you move with the
yeah,
the pail and everything.
the wash tub bass.
How do you get every note from one string? That I never could understand.
Yeah, the scale length. This is a higher note. That's a lower note. So when you have the wash tub bass, when you move your finger down the broomstick, you get a higher note. When you move your finger up the broomstick, you get a lower note. Let me put it this way. I'll say this. It's not an exact science. The washed up guys will give you something in the neighborhood of a pitch, but it's more of a boom than an actual pitch.
And the saw instrument where they have a saw and they
Oh yeah, beautiful.
Wow.
That takes an ear. You got to really have a good ear for that because it's approximate. And you got to get your vibrato so it's kind of in the center of the pitch,
I think you can use anything for an instrument, I believe.
I think that's right. If music's in you, it's going to come out.
Yeah. So we want to start our Q&A. The first question is, who's the oldest band you played with? What I mean is the one who's had the longest run and the youngest band you had played with.
Probably the longest run was last weekend was the Little Anthony and the Imperials. They started in 1957.
Imperials.
They're still performing to this day. They would be sort of tied neck and neck with the Shirelles, who I've worked with many, many, many years. Shirelles started, I think, in 57, 58 was their first record. They were in high school. They were teenagers at the time. And then the youngest band I've ever played was a kid from Japan named Yuto Miyazawa. He's a guitar prodigy. When I first worked with him, I think he was 9 years old.
Wow.
Little tiny kid who shredded. I've known him a long time. He's in college now. He grew up. He's a big kid now. But when I first played with him, he was 9 years old. And he went on to sit in and play with Ozzy Osbourne, who was his hero and stuff like that. Amazing guitar player. But
Ozzy Osbourne, no way.
Yeah. He's a young kid when I played with him.
Who is your dream duet? Like a band, I guess. I mean.
Yeah. It's funny. I played with a lot of people who have been, longtime heroes of mine. I would love to one day meet and ever get to play any music with somebody like Stevie Wonder, for instance.
Oh, nice.
Never met him, but he'd be on my bucket list, my dream list. Let's put it that way.
That's kind of awesome.
Yeah.
So someone wants, and say, I don't know if I should ask this question. They want to know if you still continue relationships with the people you played in a band with.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, bands, very, very seldom does a band end by saying, "Screw you! I never want to talk to you ever again." That's really the minority of things that happen. What usually happens is that there's not enough work, or the band members get other work doing other things, or people kind of go their separate ways. There's usually very little acrimony. I mean, there are a few people that I'd be fine with if I never saw ever again. But even them, I'm not opposed to playing with, because we still playing the common language of music. But yeah, my whole career has been building a network of associates over years and years and years, because this person will recommend you to that thing, and this person will recommend you to that thing. So it sort of behooves me to sort of keep in touch and stay friendly with everybody I've ever worked with, because it leads to more work.
Well, I hope this question doesn't cause. Well, thank you for that answer. That's
Of
actually
course.
pretty interesting. But I hope this question doesn't cause controversy. Who's the worst person you played with that you actually don't want to play with again?
uh, there are a few. There are a few that shall remain nameless, and it's usually not have to do with their playing. It usually has to do with their personality.
Oh, wow.
But there's some people that I could never play with ever again, and be fine if I never saw a couple. There's a few. I won't name any names. It's not anybody you would necessarily know. I don't think any of the stars that I work with have been awful people. Most of them been absolutely fine or interesting. At the worst, you could say is like, oh, they're interesting.
Did you ever play with Genesis? Yeah, I heard that thing about Phil Collins. He's not doing very well. He had to stop drumming, actually.
Yeah, he's not drumming, but he is singing. They're out touring, so I gotta hand it to him. No, I've never worked with anybody in that band. So again, my phone's on. I'm available if they need. Can be there anytime they need.
So, who do you compare yourself with?
I think that, especially after this many years of doing it, there's, just like we're all individuals, and those two snowflakes are alike. I don't think there's anybody who does exactly what I do. There are a lot of people that do some similar things to what I do. I'll say this, like some of my heroes, for instance. And one of my former teachers was the great Stanley Clark, great bass player. So I don't do anything like what he does, but I admire him to this day. Not that I would compare myself to him either, but there's another session player in New York City that you know from the David Letterman show named Will Lee, and Will is just my hero. Like everything that he does
Wow.
makes complete sense to me. The way that he approaches songs, the way that he approaches recording sessions, I identify with it. I just not that I can do what he does, but like I say, it translates to me somehow. I feel it what he does, and I admire him a great deal.
Yeah. Judging from the music you were listening, is this so? Who's your music influence? Would it be James Jamerson or Paul McCartney or both?
Well, it's interesting because the Beatles say that they were listening to Jamerson. They were listening to the Motown records when they were coming up in England, and they covered Motown several times. They covered the Shirelles, who I play with, twice. They covered the Shirelles. So, Jamerson is kind of like the beginning point of all of that music. He was the first guy to really bring the electric bass into a popular music format, in a very well-known way. And Paul McCartney listened to that and absorbed all that music, and then created a lot of the vocabulary for what became modern rock and roll bass playing. So yeah, those guys are huge influences. Probably Jamerson, I've studied his lines more than McCartney, but I'm equally impressed by both. I grew up listening to John Entwistle from The Who, listening to all the things that he was doing. Very influenced by Stanley Clark and Jaco Pastorius and the jazz guys like that. So there's a lot of them, a lot of people that really, and Larry Graham from Sly and the Family Stone.
Oh, yeah.
Huge impression on me as a youngster. So a lot of people, I tried to assimilate their style as much as I could.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's why it would make you a better bass player.
Yeah.
But wow, this musician, I've totally forgot about this guy. What do you think of Edgar Winter?
Oh, genius,
Yeah.
genius, perfect pitch, amazing. He's got what they call it, absolute pitch. I think that's the technical term for it. Written and arranged and produced and performed so much great music for 50 years now. He's got an enormous legacy of tremendous music. I'm a fan, even going back to the Frankenstein days and Edgar Winter's White Trash and all that stuff.
Yeah, he's great. Yeah, it's just amazing to him picking up a guitar and just starts playing it. He just picks it up and plays it. Doesn't he's trying to tunes it or whatever. He just goes. Really
Genius,
good.
Genius.
Yeah. So here's a couple more questions for you.
Yeah.
And everyone in the audience, make sure you smash that subscribe button for more content. Yeah, thank you very much, Ivan, for joining us today. It's
Man, my
awesome.
pleasure. It's been really a lot of fun talking with you, and you've
Yeah,
got a tremendous curiosity about all the crazy stuff that I've done. So I really appreciate
yeah. I'm
your
actually.
interest.
Oh yeah, the bass guitar. I like. It wasn't because look, Marty McFly. Let's ask these bass guitarists if that's what happens to them. No, but I was into like wasn't into John Entwistle, but I was into like Peter Townsend,
Sure.
um, and one of these really good, famous female guitar players as well. It's amazing what they can do. What is keeping you busy these days?
Well, like I say, knock wood, it's been booked lately. So I've been, the concerts are coming back, the private party gigs are coming back, the recording sessions are coming back, the Broadway shows are all coming back. So I am booked. I know pretty much where I'm going to be between now and say November. Like
Excellent.
I'm almost fully booked. I mean, I certainly have some weekdays. If you need me on a Tuesday, I'm available. But I think all my Saturday nights between now and November are booked. It's been
Well,
great.
yeah,
It's
it's
been very
definitely
thankful.
thinking if I ever get married again, I'll certainly be calling you up. No
I know a
problem with that.
band. I know a
Yeah,
bunch of
why not?
bands.
Yeah. So I really appreciate that, Ivan. Thank you. We're going to end the stream. I appreciate you, everything. You've just a wonderful guest, and
Man,
the
my honor,
guitar.
Chris. Thank you so much for having me.
You're
Really
very
appreciate it.
welcome. With all the problems of not getting you booked, like what did I cancel it 3-4 times before I?
Not a problem.
Okay,
Not a
thanks.
problem. It's the and I probably either would have canceled on you or had to probably the same thing. The schedules change, especially
Mhm.
with freelance bookings.
Yeah,
I could have gotten a call tonight saying we need you at Terra Blues to play the shift tonight, and I would have had to call you and go, Chris, sorry, we got to postpone it yet again. But I'm thankful it worked out this time, and we found the time where both of us.
excellent.
It's
I
great.
hope we touched on everything. Questions that touched on type of food you eat. I think what do you like to eat before you play a gig?
I'm a
One more.
low carb vegetarian. That's what I do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. 30
Excellent.
years,
Good.
32 years.
Vegetarian. No
Yeah,
problem.
all
Awesome,
good.
Ivan. Okay, so we're gonna end the stream, and everyone, everything, all his music, where you can get the book is down below in the description of the video.
Yeah.
And this is Chris Robert signing off from Ivan Bodley. See ya.
Thanks, man.